Hello, everybody. And this is Ann Lund. First of all, I want to thank Gary, of course, for having me host another podcast on his venue, the Eye Opener Society, which is available both on Podbean and YouTube. I recommend downloading the Podbean app and listening to his shows while driving. They're great, and his podcast has many guests that encompass a ton of metaphysical subjects. Personally, I listen to it on my way to work, and the app is just super easy to use. So if you want to listen to different perspectives, just follow him. But let me start. If you don't know me, my name is Ann Lund, and I'm a writer by heart. I write a blog called hauntedandwaiting.blog, where I share true ghost stories as well as chapters of my free novel called My Bronx Haunting, which is about the haunted house I grew up in New York City in the 1980s. You can also find me on my Facebook group, Haunted and Waiting, as well as here on my podcast, also called Haunted and Waiting. Or you can go to my Facebook group and just join there and add any stories or comments that you would like. But for today, let's move on to this topic, which is basically exploring ghosts and the afterlife with a mention of different faiths. Where did these ideas come from? If you've listened to my last podcast, you may have heard about my ghost notebook. It's just a marble notebook where I dot down any true stories I hear from friends or family, as well as any odd things that I've had happen to me that have no explanation. And in doing so, I soon realized that ghosts or spirits or hauntings seem to come from different forms. You see, hauntings are as different as a box of crayons. There are ghosts of people we once knew, beings that come to tell us that they're okay. There are stories of evil ghosts, although rare, they seem to get the most attention and are meant for Halloween parties and campfire stories. And then there are the odd ones, the lost ghosts, the ones that seem to have no idea what they're doing, as if they're walking aimlessly on this planet, lost and perpetually confused, unwilling to communicate in any way. So I asked myself, why are ghosts and hauntings so different? Why do only some of them communicate? Why do some seem lost? Why do some want to help and others want to hurt? So I decided to look at religions and traditions and learned a lot, and I would like to share that. So human fascination with the supernatural is as old as civilization itself, with tales and encounters forming a part of nearly every single culture. This podcast is going to go into the beliefs surrounding ghosts and spirits from very religious perspectives and examining how different faiths interpret and explain or even deny the existence of these entities. So I'm going to share a few true ghost stories and how I chunk them into faiths. If you listen to my previous podcast, you know I keep that notebook and this is where I've gotten these stories from. But to secure the privacy of the people that have told me the stories or are in the stories themselves, I may have changed the names and locations slightly, just to protect their privacy. Start with story number 1. A family member, which I need to say is also a non-believer, and actually one of those annoying non-believers who didn't believe anything until it happened to him, told me this story. His wife, another family member, had passed away after a long illness. When she passed, it was actually a comfort to us, only because we knew she wasn't suffering anymore. And this particular family member, her husband, was riddled in guilt because of it. Because of this sense of being relieved that she wasn't around anymore. And it was a terrible feeling. A few weeks had gone by after she had passed when he was sitting alone in the yard. Now, I need to explain the yard to you. This was a house that she had always wanted to purchase. It was her dream house. It was situated on acres of beautiful prairie land. And when she was in physical form, she used to love to walk on the property. And it was really beautiful. And it was a place where she took comfort when she was very much alive. Well into the last days of her illness, she still took comfort in her property. Well, after she had passed, he was sitting there thinking about her all alone when he felt this soft hand on the back of his neck and heard her say his name, Sam. And for a moment, he forgot that she had died, and instinctually he turned around expecting to see her. because that was how she often touched him. And lo and behold, he was all alone. He had later told me that this warm feeling came over him, that she had moved on and wanted him to be at peace, and that was the message. And somehow this entity had conveyed this to him, even though he hadn't seen it. He just heard her, felt her. So what happened? Many of us have stories like this. I know for certain Sunset Child, an author of another podcast here on the Eye Opener Society, had told me that her deceased mother had once visited her when her daughter was very young in a similar way. Now, she attributes ghosts to nothing more than imprints of energy from a time when they were made, a timeline of sorts that stuck. But to be honest, it's as good as an explanation as any other. But I think stories like these, stories in which the deceased relatives come to say hi and let us know that they're okay, are common in every culture. But to be honest, I feel it gets its credits for Catholicism, and let me explain why. Now, I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and the Catholics believe that the dead are often in a spiritual state. They haven't disappeared, but they are beyond human interaction. And Catholics believe that the deceased visit the living, typically to provide comfort or convey an important message, such as in the story above. But these souls are not seen as ghosts, not scary ghosts in that sense, but more like spirits meant to comfort. So not in a haunting sense. Ironically, the church opposes its practices like seances or Ouija boards, as these are viewed as attempts to bypass the divine and to summon spirits artificially. Strongly believe that if you are to receive a message, it will come to you. There's no need to search for it. And to be honest with you, I kind of adhere to that. This is why many Catholics pray for their deceased loved ones, hoping to assist them on their journey into the other life. So let's move on to another story. This one you may know, and it's not my story, but it's commonly known. The story of Chloe, an African slave who lived in the Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana. Now, if you don't know that story, I can bring it to you really quickly. It was the 9th birthday of the slave owner's daughter, and Chloe was worried that she was somehow going to be banished from the house. She was what we would call at that time a house slave. So she had the comforts of living within a home rather than out in a field picking cotton, which was presumably much worse. So, fear that she was somehow going to be pushed out of the home, she had concocted this plan that she believed would earn her favor and respect from the ruthless slave owners. What she did was she crushed some poisonous oleander leaves and she mixed them into a birthday cake, intending to poison the wife and the children. But her hope was that they wouldn't die, they would just become sick, and she would nurse them back to health, and then the slave owner would be so happy with her that she would be back in his good favor and remain in the house. The sad part about this story was that something went tragically wrong, and unfortunately, the mother and both young children ended up dying. Fearing that she would be blamed, and rightfully so, Chloe ran to her family that was living in the woods at the time in cabins. As I said, they were plantation slaves working outdoors. And she was seeking for a place to hide, hoping that her family would hide her. But sadly, her own family turned their backs on her and handed her back to the slave owner, where she was put to death. I believe she was hung. But to this day, that house, the Myrtles Plantation, is said to be haunted by Chloe as a price she had to pay for her bad karma. And if you YouTube it, you will see there are plenty of pictures of Chloe, as well as handprints of the deceased children on this famous mirror that lays beginning of the house. Which brings me to my next religion, which is the Buddhists and this idea of karma. Buddhist cultures hold a deep belief in reincarnation, and this cycle of rebirth allows for the possibility of ghosts and spirits, but they're often seen as souls struggling with negative karma from their past lives, such as in poor Chloe's case. So, if you've done something wrong, chances are you may be stuck on this planet until you win good favor So in Buddhism rather, these spirits are called hungry ghosts, and they're thought to be tormented by this bad karma and by past evil doings. This is why the Buddhists will try to appease these spirits and help them achieve peace by offering fruit and prayers and assist them with their transition. Interesting, I would say. Let's go on to what I like to call is the loop ghost. That's what I call them anyway. And these are really common. These are spirits that don't seem very intelligent in that they're not communicating. They appear as if they're reliving some tragic experience over and over again. And I had an experience such as this. I went to visit Gettysburg a few years ago, and I was awestruck by the tragic history of America's bloodiest day of war. My husband and I decided to visit Sachs Bridge. Now, for those of you that don't know it, it's known to be haunted, and apparently 3 Confederate soldiers had been hung at that bridge. My husband and I went there at night, and we took a ton of pictures. Like I said, I did not try to contact the spirits. I don't believe in doing that. But I was hoping to catch an image on my camera. Sadly, I did not. And it justifies my feelings that ghosts will appear when they choose to, and not when you're trying to summon them. So if it's not in the cards, you won't see them. However, while I was there, I did meet this young couple who had shown me a photograph that they had taken the night before at another area in Gettysburg. It wasn't much to look at, to be honest. It looked more like just a foggy shadow with some trees in the background, no discernible image. But the couple assured me that right before they had snapped that picture, they saw a ghost of a soldier running across a field and towards the schoolyard. But by the time they had reached for their camera to take the picture, the figure had disappeared. Now, stories of soldiers in Gettysburg are rampant, and there are tons of footage that you could find on that. If you're interested, I suggest just do a YouTube search and you'll find them. But being curious and the fact that I was in Gettysburg, I decided to look it up, and I later learned that this was a common haunting that occurred by a present-day middle school. So right there, right where there's a middle school, apparently was haunted. And as the accounts reported, the school, which now lies on the grounds of a once battlefield, often sees apparitions of soldiers running through the hallways, through lockers, through classrooms. Look it up. Strange to say the least. So I went to the school to explore, but sadly wasn't lucky enough to see what they had seen, namely what they described as a young, terrified soldier reliving, most likely, his last day on earth. This is another common type of haunting or ghost, one that does not communicate, but simply seems stuck in some strategic, sad timeline. A lot like the character Dr. Malcolm Crowe played by Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense. Just don't know they're dead. Which brings me to my next religion, which is Hinduism, okay? And they actually believe in ghosts. The Hindus believe that certain individuals, especially those who die unexpectedly or violently, such as our soldier friend in Gettysburg, might become ghosts if their souls cannot peacefully transition. Hindus partake in rituals after death to ensure that the souls find peace and move on. So not like a wake, but more as if helping the soul transition. Because without these, this soul may linger, potentially becoming a restless ghost who haunts places or people that they were attached to. And this is why that death ritual is so important. Let's move on. Have you ever heard of an evil ghost? One that pulls hair, knocks people out of windows, or scratches them on the back? Well, there's a place called Malahide Castle, another place called Leap Castle, both in Ireland, by the way. Ireland seems to have its fair share of these. And both of these castles have a ghost or an entity that likes to push people as they walk through the halls. Other than that, there's no communication. But these occurrences are rare. And although there's the stuff that nightmares are made of and why most people are terrified of ghosts, they are actually very rare. But there are tons of stories about these entities. Sometimes the haunting lies in an item like a doll or a piece of jewelry that seems to attract bad luck, such as the Annabelle doll. I'm not sure how I feel about this, but who am I to pass judgment? I've never had an experience with a possessed item or evil spirit. But let's talk about that. And let's talk about the jinn. In Islam, the concept of a traditional ghost does not exist as it does in other faiths. The souls of the dead are considered to remain in a state of purgatory, which is between life and the afterlife, where they await the day of judgment. And that's where they say they stay. Islam, however, does recognize the jinn, which is a supernatural being with spiritual and physical forms. Jinns are neither inherently evil nor good, but they are capable of interfering with human affairs, which has sometimes led them to be mistaken for ghosts, and what believers are cautioned against attempting to communicate with them. Because unlike the other ghosts, which cannot change your environment, a jinn can. My advice, play it safe and try not to communicate. Just ignore and avoid. Sort of like a spam call. If you answer it, it just may not stop calling. Jehovah's Witness, by the way, believe in a similar thing. And so they don't believe in ghosts. Anything that tries to contact you in a spiritual form is thought to be demonic. And so just avoid it at all costs. I've had very little luck in my research on the Jewish faith and their definition of a ghost, other than to say that what I did find seems to support their belief that once dead, a soul falls into the spiritual realm and cannot be seen in this world, which sort of negates the concept of a ghost. However, having grown up in New York City with many Jewish people, I could assure you the ones that I grew up with did. So if you have any information about the Jewish faith and how they see ghosts or spirits, I would love to hear it. Just come to my blog or my Facebook group and share. Now, which brings me to my last story. What about the ghost that seems human and just comes to give you a message and then it's gone? Well, let me tell you a strange story that actually happened to me. Years ago, my friend and I found ourselves in a bakery when a spirit, that's right, a spirit approached her and I and began singing a song. Now, you might say, what do you mean a spirit? Well, this was a person, looked like a person. We both saw her, but apparently nobody else did. And her connection was not to me, but to my friend, and a powerful message for her. She was an old woman with a thick head of white hair and bluish tint in it, and 2 slits for eyes, barely stand up on her own. Biggest smile, a happy kind of person. She approached my friend without any reason and just started singing. My friend broke out in tears until a final hug snapped her out of it. You see, this woman, or ghost, had given her a message from her father, who had recently passed away of Alzheimer's disease. My friend had never seen this woman before and had never seen her afterwards, at least as far as I'm aware of. Don't believe me? Well, if you're curious about the full story, you can go find it on my blog, Haunted and Waiting. Just take a visit and look for the story called Oh, Danny Boy, a Ghost Story. Had I not been there, I might not have believed it myself, but there was no earthly way this entity could have known what she knew. And after she delivered her message, which was basically the song, Oh, Danny Boy, she walked out of our lives, never to be seen again. Which brings me to my last religion. Believe it or not, Voodoo. I actually like their version of the ghost. In Voodoo, spirits and ghosts are common, and they're regarded as ancestral guides, protectors, and even mischievous beings. But they are believed to play a key role watching over and influencing the lives of their descendants. Much like that old Irish woman, and interestingly enough, my friend was of Irish descent, but her family had been in America for generations. I find that very odd. So it was telling that this woman came with a thick Irish accent and was hyper-focused on my friend that day, barely paying any mind to me. These spirits, according to Voodoo, are not here to scare, but to protect and guide. And it's why Voodoo ceremonies are often performed to honor, and unlike Catholicism and a lot of other religions, they seek to communicate with them. The spirits are not considered hauntings in the fearful sense, but are respected and invoked for guidance, protection, and healing. This is forming a very intimate connection between the physical and spiritual world, which I kind of wish more people had. So, well, if you've listened this far, I suppose you are a believer, or you think I'm crazy. But if you are a believer, I thank you. And in ending, I just want to close that the views of hauntings, ghosts, and spirits and the afterlife obviously vary across religions and cultures, but our fascination with spirits transcends all cultures, and there is a shared curiosity that we all have. So, next time you come across something odd, be it a person, an image, an item, or an experience you cannot explain, open your mind to the possibility that you too may have been paid by a visit and may also be waiting and haunted for an explanation yourself. And remember, sharing is caring, so feel free to share this with your friends or on your social media. And until next time, this is Haunted and Waiting with Ann Lund. Thank you.